Thank you and welcome. And I'm going to structure my conversation in four segments. One is about AMLO. The second one really is about Mexico economics in Mexico today. The third one is about tourism in Mexico, and the last one is about security and about the cartels. So as you can imagine, they're very vast subjects, and I will do my best to keep it within 15 minutes. And I think it'll be really interesting if we can have the chat and the questions come in, or for you to come up with your questions and for me to answer them. Like I said, it's a quite ample subject, and in fact, this beginning with AMLO, it's interesting because AMLO is one of these figures that I believe very few people understand, and I don't pretend to understand him as well. I do know quite a bit about him, but let me start by saying, and you may agree or disagree, and by the way, I welcome you to agree or disagree when we have the question and answer period. But in my opinion, he's a populist nationalist, okay? Some people may say, and I was talking to my daughter, who, by the way, is a PhD in Mexican history from Colombia, okay, that she sees him as an opportunist, which is an interesting point of view as well. Now, he's a very slippery guy, so he's very difficult really to figure out. Now, he does have strong tendencies towards being an authoritarian, being strongly dogmatic on socialistic economic policies, and unlike his predecessors, he likes to create division. Okay, and that's one of the difficult or one of the dangerous parts about AMLO. And what I mean by creating division is he likes to really, put the poor against the rich, the neoliberal against the socialist, the state against capitalism. Okay, so there's a lot of that rhetoric, so to speak. Okay, in essence, I also believe he's a strong ideologue. He's very, very committed to his ideology. And that's why a lot of the private sector in Mexico doesn't seem to get it. He says, well, look, this guy doesn't make any sense. He's not doing anything right for Mexico. However, you have to remember what he believes in, too. He believes in state intervention, in state control, all right, on the one hand. He does believe in staying close to the people, especially to the poor. He has kind of this messianic, for lack of a better word, mission about him. He does like to give money to the poor, and what he's done with a lot of the spending, he's, by the way, cut back in a lot of spending, but some of the spending he's doing is really behind social programs, okay? He believes in centralization of the government, all right, which means kind of walking away from federalism or giving power to the different states. But it's interesting because the pandemic has proven otherwise, okay? And his focus is very internal as opposed to external. What does that mean? This guy, by the way, did not have a passport until about 4 or 5 years ago, all right? He didn't care to travel or get to know about other countries. He still doesn't. And by the way, it was unprecedented that he actually traveled to Washington about a month and a half or 2 months ago to sign the free trade agreement with the US, okay? Now, during the last 2 years, and I'll go quickly through AMLO because, like I said, there's a lot of material to cover. And there's a lot of angles to cover about AMLO as well, because he's quite an intriguing individual. But over the last 2 years, he began his administration in December 2018 after the third attempt at running as president. In these 2 years, he has truly embraced what I call fiscal austerity. But what that translates into is that he's cut back on a lot of the ministries and therefore the efficiency of the government bureaucracy. He also has pursued pet projects, very specifically, and you probably have heard of this, is basically building, or I don't want to say building Pemex back up or strengthening Pemex, but making Pemex again an angular piece of the economy, building refineries, the Mayan train in the southeast of Mexico, and a lot of the social programs. Now, when we talk about social programs, it's about, yes, distributing money to the poor. It's also about, giving access to young people to universities and free university and expanding education. So there are some programs that are, by the way, have been positive for the lower socioeconomic level in Mexico. Now, he is at odds with the private sector. He's got this continuous clash with the private sector, and unfortunately, a lot of his projects and a lot of his actions have really driven or have made private investment very, very shy. Now, having said that, it's interesting because we'll talk about the economy and how foreign direct investment is, what the track on foreign direct what the track is on foreign direct investment. Now, this is the interesting thing. Popularity, okay, of AMLO as of August 2020 has declined. But what's shocking to me, and I got to read these numbers, is that when he entered in December 2018, the overall approval rating was 74%. Today, August 2020, and affected by the COVID pandemic, and of course, because of the economic contraction and security issues, is 58%. So 58% is still a very high approval rating, okay? And in fact, when people are asked as of August 2020 about very specifically about how they think that he's addressing corruption, believe it or not, there's 24% of those surveys saying he's doing very well, and 43% think he's doing well. But when you ask other people, the business elite or some of the intellectual elites in Mexico, they'll tell you he's doing a terrible, poor job. So now let me jump on now to economics. Like I said, there's a lot of material to cover just on each one. Now, the economics of Mexico, unfortunately, since AMLO came on, we had a year of stagnation in 2019. The economy pretty much grew less than 1%. It's just disastrous. Now, this year, if we put the last 2 years, they have been horrible. And very specifically, I can say the second quarter, we contracted 18.9% on our GDP. The projections for 2020 they range between -9% and -12%. It's dramatic. Unemployment, we have 12.5 million people that have joined, the unemployment ranks, which is, 16.5% of the official workforce. You got to remember that in Mexico, we have a huge level of underemployment, more or less around 40 to 45% of underemployment. We've also have about 500,000, an estimate of about 500,000 what we call small and medium-sized businesses that went out of business between February and now. Okay, and that's 500,000 out of about 4 million small and mid-sized businesses. Okay, so the private sector confidence is completely trashed, sadly. However, hear this: foreign direct investment for the first semester of 2020 is around $18 billion. It's actually up, okay, about 10% above last year. Last year's foreign direct investment, full year for 2019, was $33 billion. It was down slightly from $35 billion in 2018. Okay. Now here are the next piece: remittances, mainly from the U.S. The first semester of 2020, $19 billion. They're up 11%. Okay, and tracking, by the way, the rolling rate will be $38 billion for 2020, and that compares with $36 billion in remittances, mainly from our paisanos in the U.S. sending the money back. And by the way, foreign direct investment, just to let you know, about between 48-50% comes from the U.S., followed by Spain, Germany, and other countries. Okay, but the big ones really happen to be the U.S., Spain, and Germany. All right. Now, what else I can tell you about the economy? I know that I was talking to you, Gene, and from just to give you a little bit of flavor, Gene was asking, well, what's going on with these shutdowns and the lockdowns? And we're saying, AMLO was very slow to declare a COVID emergency. And one of the reasons is that he knows that our population base is poor and is underemployed. So he really couldn't enforce a lockdown, although he highly suggested one, and he officially declared, different industries as being essential and non-essential. So what you could pretty much see around Mexico and around a lot of the populations that I went around is that the small shops kept open. And what I mean by small shops, I'm meaning the people that fix the tires, or the mom and pops, or the electricians, or the shoe repair people, or the electricians. And so they continue their life because they basically live on a day-to-day basis. And now the people that had lost their jobs, unfortunately, came from a lot of what they called non-essential activities. And I can tell you, for example, non-essential would be beer manufacturing. Beer manufacturing very specifically closed for about 3 months. So there was a point at which, I know it sounds kind of silly, but we were having shortage of beer in this country. By the way, Mexico is one of the largest beer exporters. I think it's about the 6th largest beer exporter in the world. Oh, by the way, let me backtrack a little bit. And I didn't tell you this about Mexico. Well, Mexico is the 15th largest economy in the world. Okay, so it belongs to the top 20, okay, or the G20. And also it's the 2nd largest economy in Latin America. Okay, and we kind of forget it's got about 130 million people in population, and we're going to be tied together forever and ever, Mexico and the U.S. So whatever happens in Mexico, we have a saying in Mexico that says that whenever the U.S. sneezes, we get a cold in Mexico. So things are important. And by the way, whatever happens in Mexico does become a problem for the U.S., unfortunately. Okay. And it's interesting because one of the things I missed about AMLO, because there's so many things about AMLO, and we'll get to them, was that one of the things he's managed quite well is the relationship with the U.S. And I'm going to share with you a little joke here in Mexico. Not a lot of us like AMLO. Of course, remember that he has a huge base, and our base in Mexico, our population base, unfortunately, is a lower socioeconomic level, or they're they're poor. But when you talk to the people that have a little bit more resources, we don't necessarily like AMLO. Okay, that doesn't mean he's doing right or wrong. We don't like him because we don't think he's doing the right things, or he's anti, quote unquote, neoliberal. But at a party last week, we were saying, you know what? It's kind of funny. We kind of like Trump. And I know it's funny because we try to be apolitical. And I'm going to be very respectful because I don't want to touch any politics here. We said the fact we like Trump because it's the only person that AMLO listens to, and the only check and balance that AMLO has is Trump. So he's not going to do anything crazy. He's going to move things along and forward with the U.S. and maintain a very solid relationship, which he has, by the way, given the complexities of the relationships right now with the U.S. So let me now switch from economy to tourism, and I'm trying to keep it as quick as possible. And I apologize if I'm keeping it somewhat superficial. Now, tourism has taken a huge hit because of COVID, and tourism is an important source of foreign exchange reserves for Mexico. Okay, in 2019 alone, we had almost $25 billion coming in from tourism, and about 45 million tourists. This year, we're having a drop versus 2019, at least through June, where I have the statistics. We have a 41% drop, okay, and what we call foreign exchange receipts or revenue, okay, and that's huge. We have more or less this expenditure per tourist has also come down by 53%. Occupancy, by the way, is down by 33%. I'm sorry, it's actually 28.7%, which is down by 33%. All right. And in terms of visitors, I wrote it down here. I can't find the visitors, but I also know we're down, if I recall the number correctly. By the way, we're down right now to 48% in terms of visitors to Mexico. From that base that I told you, that was 45 million. So we're running, we should be running a rolling rate of about, or about 20 million through June. And we're practically not even reaching 10 million tourists. Now, the areas most affected, very quickly, I can tell you, is Cancun, number one, Cabo, number two, three, the area of Puerto Vallarta, what we call the Riviera Nayarita, which is a beautiful place, by the way, in the Pacific. Mexico City, believe it or not, has a huge influx. And then the central states where I'm at in San Miguel de Allende. And I can give you a little bit of flavor about San Miguel de Allende as well. Okay, San Miguel de Allende pretty much imposed a lockdown and a shutdown beginning pretty much I would say beginning of April. And it stayed under a lockdown through mid-June. And what that meant is literally, I would say 90% of the hotels shut down. The hotels that stayed open were small mom and pop hotels, but the important or, let's say corporate hotels shut down, restaurants shut down, small shops, galleries shut down. Huge impact to the local economy, as you can imagine. The reason being is there's basically three sources of income for San Miguel de Allende's economy. One is tourism. Second one is real estate investment and or real estate, meaning secondary homes. By the way, there was a buoyant wine industry or wine tourism industry taking off around the San Miguel de Allende area. Pretty interesting. And the third one is agriculture. Now, agriculture, by the way, in general has been doing very well around Mexico. And it's doing quite well in San Miguel de Allende, with some exceptions. We haven't had enough rain, so some of the crops or the yields for the crops weren't coming out to be what they were expected. No? But what I can tell you is that San Miguel, along with Cancun, Cabo, Puerto Vallarta, are reopening. They're reopening with very strict guidelines in terms of health measures and making sure that they keep tourists very, very safely. The opening was very gradual also to allow first for Mexican tourism, but also for foreign tourism. Now, the big limitation, of course, are flights, as you well know, throughout the world. But if you're an American, you can pretty much come to Mexico without any issues. You would be pleasantly surprised or shocked, depends how you look at it, in terms of all the precautions you have to take when you get off the plane. They will take your temperature right off the plane, by the way, and they'll have you fill out some forms and take phone numbers of places where you will be staying. By the time, or even before you reach immigration, you'll have to wash your hands a couple of times, step on some of these disinfectants, and again, in some cases, take your temperature again. So they're taking a lot of measures. There's no one in the people can't be inside the airport. They have to be outside the airport. And this pretty much happens every time you walk into a restaurant, which can't have more than 50% capacity, depending on the city, sometimes 30 to 50. And the hotels, by the way, started operating at 30% capacity. And they could, in other words, they could only have up to 30%. And they're going to take it up to 50%. And they're taking this whole social distancing very, very seriously. If you're to travel by land, you may as well. I could say you can make it in. Yes. By the way, some towns like San Miguel have what they call health filters, and what that means is if you don't have a hotel reservation, they'll probably bounce you back to wherever you came from. Okay. Or if you don't have a justification of your being here, meaning you don't have a home here, or you don't have a special invitation, you may be shifted back. But however, these Mexican cities do need tourism, and as I am very well aware, the big towns like Cancun, Cabo, Puerto Vallarta are making an effort not only to take measures, promote and welcome tourists, and make sure that they're not only comfortable but safe. So talking about safety, that takes me to beyond the health safety. Let me talk about security and about cartels. Security, unfortunately, is I'm gonna make it sound horrible at first, and then I'm gonna try and put it a little bit into perspective. But unfortunately, AMLO's policy of hugs and not bullets is very ineffective. Very, very, very ineffective, and And unfortunately, under the current administration of AMLO, or Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the number of killings have risen, and pretty much to record levels. So since his administration started, we pretty much have had an average of 98 deaths or killings or homicides per day. So as of September 2020, there's been 63,000 deaths, okay, in a year and 9 months of his administration. So he's truly breaking the record here. Now, his reorganization, unfortunately, of creating the National Guard has been extremely confusing for the federal police that had to integrate into the National Guard. It's been confusing for the military. It's been taxing for the military as well. They haven't addressed what I call the fundamental issues, which is, increasing local police forces and municipality police forces, better training at all levels, including federal, attacking not the head or the top of the cartels, but really addressing going into the middle operative levels that would make them perhaps. Again, you got to be a security expert in this, so I'm coming up with some of my personal opinions, so bear with me, please. But I think that, yes, it does help to take the head away, but the problem with taking the head away, which President Calderon found out, okay, was that by taking off the head, it was like creating a hydra. You create 6 new more heads. So one of my personal takes on this is you need to attack the operating system, if you think of it as a management, you can get rid of the CEO and you can always get a new CEO, but what you really need to do is get rid of the key people that are operating at the middle levels, so that you can truly inhabilitate some of these organizations. So the biggest security problem in Mexico has to do with cartels, okay, with the organized crime, okay. And they are, let me say this, although some cartels are expanding, they're pretty much localized by regions. I'd like to say that by cities, sadly, or by states, sometimes it's really by regions. The strongest cartel at this point that has overtaken the Cartel de Sinaloa, which is Chapo's cartel, is a cartel called Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. I'll translate. That's Jalisco's cartel of the new generation. They're ruthless, very aggressive. They've shown a lot of their power, by the way. And they've gone into direct conflict, by the way, with Sinaloa cartel, which is the second and largest and most powerful cartel right now in Mexico as well. And of course, as you probably heard and read in the news, the Sinaloa cartel showed a strong show of force when military forces in Mexico last October had actually captured Chapo's son. They came out to the streets. They killed almost about 18 people. They took over the city, and the military forces basically had to retreat, and they had to turn in Chapo's son back. A huge embarrassment. And by the way, in my very personal opinion, I'm not going to consider myself an intellectual, but in a lot of Mexican intellectuals' opinion, it kind of shows that the current government or administration doesn't have the resolve and or perhaps the ability to address the cartels. Which, by the way, in another quick parenthesis, which is, like I said, there's a lot of subject here, or a lot of subject matter. Trump has been pushing very hard, and AMLO has been pushing back on Trump, which is rare because he really goes along with a lot of what Trump asked, but to declare the cartels as terrorist organizations. What this means really is that it would allow the U.S. To openly have military intervention in Mexico, which Mexicans don't want, and AMLO doesn't want. So AMLO is trying to address this, but I think he's been highly inefficient, highly disorganized, highly incompetent. And let me go back to the cartels real quick. I was victim, by the way, I don't want to scare you guys, but I was the victim of one of the cartels. And this was about exactly when I moved here to San Miguel, October 2018. I drove my car to Celaya to get it verified, as we need to do it for pollution purposes. And 8 o'clock in the morning, a car blocks me. Basically runs in front of me, blocks me. I had to brake. Three guys come out, 2 of them with AK-47s. one with a 45 revolver, and I was very clear. Not the first time this happens to me, unfortunately. So I said, I know you want to take the car, so here are the keys, and you let me walk away. They weren't quite sure they were going to let me walk away. But let me tell you, 8:30 in the morning, cars going by, mom's taking kids to school, things like that. Let me put it this way too: when you have an AK-47 and you know how those things work, you don't want to screw around. So it's a small price to pay, and those people belong to the cartel of Santa Rosa. Why I'm mentioning that is the cartel of Santa Rosa de Lima grew basically by stealing gasoline out of the pipelines, okay? And they've gone to war, or I should say Nueva Generación Jalisco has gone to, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación has gone to war with the cartel in Santa Rosa de Lima because they figured, wow, that's pretty damn good business, stealing gasoline from the pipelines. So that has created a war in this area, or in this zone, or close to San Miguel. We don't experience that type of situation in San Miguel, but we're frankly 40 minutes away from it. The next big one really has to do with Juarez cartel, which is close to Chihuahua, and of course Juarez is in Chihuahua, right across from El Paso. The Tijuana cartel, and of course the cartel del Golfo, which happens to be right across from McAllen. So let me stop there, because and I hope I addressed those four subjects: AMLO, economics in Mexico, tourism, and security. I didn't address the health one, which is also a very interesting one, but I'll leave it open to any questions. I'll be more than happy to do my best to give you the objective answer, and if it's not an objective answer, to give you my opinion and let you know that it's highly biased. Okay, so if anybody wants to ask a question, just come on the screen and put your video up and your audio, and more than happy to respond.
So Ben, thank you very much for this insightful presentation about Mexico. I love the four aspects that you are sharing. I would like to ask you about those Mexicans who are educated, that have started some companies, that are trying to build their companies to provide employment, and did not have any resource from the government during the pandemic situation as compared to other countries like the US. I have received calls from friends who belong to that segment, who want to move to the US, who want to bring money to the US. They don't feel safe about their investments in Mexico. They feel like the current government is making them lose their hard assets, their businesses. They don't have the protection, but also the money that they have saved, they feel that it's unsecure there. What's your thought about that? How do you feel about that? Do you share their concern, or are they wrong? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, that's a great question, and I'm going to try and be very specific. And thank you, Arturo, for bringing something up that I forgot to mention, that, one of the few countries around the world that did not have fiscal stimulus was Mexico. López Obrador said, I'm not going to provide fiscal stimulus because in the past it has only benefited, the wealthy and the elite and certain interests. So what he did was he did give money to the poor, not sufficient. He did release some credits to very, very small businesses, again, micro businesses, which maybe are family businesses that employ one or two people. So having said that, just to create a little bit of context, it's true. This lack of fiscal stimulus and this sort of deceleration of the economy has caused a huge liquidity crunch, let alone a drop in sales. And I would agree with your friends, Arturo, that there are a lot of businesses that are needing, that are shutting down. Okay, they really can't keep up, and you can see it. It depends. A lot of the services, for example, had to shut down. Very specifically, restaurants, mid-sized restaurants or restaurant chains, service companies that were, for example, doing advertising or consulting have had to shut down. Small hotels, of course, have had to shut down. It depends, I can tell you on the other hand, so it depends. I can tell you on the other hand that some other people have been very, very successful. I'm doing some mentoring work. I do advisory work. This is funny. I'm on the board of several companies, and the companies I'm on the board, it's kind of shocking. They're doing very well. I mean, contrary to everything that you can imagine, they're doing very well. And I'll tell you about the sectors, but very specifically, well, I'll tell you the sectors. One has to do with activated carbon at the industrial level, and they're doing extraordinarily well. Another one has to do with selling and distributing, importing and distributing tools. Okay, and they're doing surprisingly well given the situation. Granted, they have some issues with collections. The other one is a company which you'd be surprised. It sells twin oxide, the famous dioxide, and they're and it was being used in farms, pig farms and poultry farms, and with the whole pandemic, it was like suddenly we were having a very hard time selling the product because it's expensive and it's difficult to handle. And with the pandemic, it's just gone sky high. I'll give you another example. I have this company that I mentor in Querétaro, mid-sized business. They probably, without violating confidentiality, I can't tell you really about the revenues, but they sell cheese and yogurt, which is high-end natural cheese and yogurt, and they're up to capacity. They're selling, and then I have this other group that they sell. And by the way, I'll help you. A lot of you met them when at the tequila, and they had these merengues. I don't know how you call them. Well, their growth slowed down versus last year, but they're in double-digit growth. So it really depends. If you talk, for example, the big ones like Bimbo, Bimbo, who happens now to own a lot of the bread factories around the world. Bimbo's doing, they're having a hard time because, in general, they're a very good measure of what's happening in Mexico. And FEMSA, as you well know, FEMSA is Coke's largest bottler outside of the U.S., and in the world. And of course, their Coke is down, but a lot of it because of the restaurants or the hotels are down. So I really think it depends, Arturo, where like in everything. I hate to say, the Rothschilds used to say that you made money when blood was rushing in the streets. I mean, a horrible statement. And they said that, of course, during the Napoleonic Wars, if you recall. And there's always opportunity. So although a lot of people see what's going on in Mexico, and they're very down on AMLO. And I'm not saying I'm down on AMLO, but again, he's very intriguing. I'd like for him to do other. Of course, I'd like for him to be more proactive on some things, but he's been very proactive with the poor. And people love him. I mean, the problem, and that's, you and I can discuss this to death, and we can say that he's backward and that he's stubborn and that he's crazy and that it doesn't make any sense. But the fact is that people love him. And why? Because this is the backlash of people feeling forgotten for the last 20 years. By the way, not much different to what's happening in the U.S., if you don't mind me saying. So I hope I answered the question, Arturo. Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else? Please don't be shy. You guys all know me, so I won't be offended.
Well, then I have a second question just before anyone else jumps with another one. So when AMLO, who by the way now is a registered brand in Mexico, so it's interesting what happened with his name and his wife's name. They registered their names. But coming back to the question, when he was in his campaign, many of us were afraid that Mexico, if he won the elections, that could become like a Venezuela 2.0, right? Like, because during the campaign, he was saying many things that Hugo Chavez mentioned before being in the power in Venezuela, and then all the things that he made. And one of the things that we were afraid is that he would change Mexican laws to become like a re-elected president and eventually could try to stay in power for generations. What do you think about that, Ben?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll give you the most objective view on that. I think AMLO, in his authoritarian upbringing, you see, it's interesting when you dig into AMLO's history. He's a great believer of Tomás Garrido, and that's getting into really delving deep into. Tomás Garrido was second governor of Tabasco after the Mexican Revolution, and this guy was pretty much a fascist. Okay, but a lot of his upbringing came from that era, from Garrido and from Madrazo, the father of Roberto Madrazo. And without going into a lot into Mexican history, AMLO is an authoritarian, okay? And AMLO has been trying to discredit and basically dismantle a lot of these autonomous agencies that have been created over the last 20 years because of the free trade agreement. For example, our independent voting agency or voting institute, Voters Elections Institute, which is great. Another one is the Institute of Competition. The other one's, of course, the Institute of Trademarks and things like that. I mean, and of course, in a way, he's been attacking the Supreme Court very strongly, which is one strong check balance. I mean, he's definitely looking for decentralized power. Now, I also want to tell you that Morena today, Morena is the party that he won with, and shockingly, Morena won 60% of the Senate and 50% of the Chamber of Deputies, as you well know, the Cámara de Diputados. And there's elections for Chamber of Deputies in 2021, and there's a very good chance that they're going to lose. They're going to lose a lot of the positions, and that some of the other parties may fill in, into those roles. And now, what I do think is different than Venezuela, there's a lot of things that are different than Venezuela. We are a much more diversified economy than Venezuela's economy, and than we were 30 years ago. And I know those of us lived in Mexico 30 years ago remember that. We were highly oil dependent. Now we're strong manufacturing, strong tourism, strong oil still, and so on. But we've really truly diversified. We have aerospace space. We export cars to around the world, to the States, and also to Germany and to Japan. And so that's number one. Number two, we've gone into this free trade agreement, and we've created a lot of free trade agreements with a lot of the world. We have a stronger voice, and we have other checks and stronger press, believe it or not. Although unfortunately, we have a very poor record of journalists being killed in this country. Sadly, unfortunately, over the last 2 or 3 years, we had over 100 journalists killed. But there's a lot. I think, thank God, we have a lot more civic activism than we used to have, 10, 20 years ago. And I would say, too, that the biggest check and balance to AMLO is the U.S. And the U.S. will not allow a situation like Chavez. By the way, just for everybody's knowledge, I arrived in Venezuela pretty much when Chavez did his failed coup and was thrown in court-martial and thrown into jail. And I pretty much left Venezuela when Chavez was starting to, when he was out of jail and he was campaigning. And one huge difference between Mexico, also another big difference, is the institutions in Venezuela had lost a lot of credibility. When I mean institutions was the different parties, the powers, meaning the legislative branch, the judicial branch had lost a lot of credibility. The military had lost credibility. All these institutions, the unions had lost credibility. All these institutions had lost a lot of credibility in Venezuela. And I don't see that in Mexico. I mean, although our institutions are still, some are stronger than others, I don't see them as weakened as the ones in Venezuela. And that also can be a counterforce to AMLO. I don't see AMLO as being, yes, I can see him pushing towards a situation like that, but I don't see him being successful. And I do hope I'm wrong. So let me stop there.
Punch Jameson, I'd like to ask a question of Ben. Am I on?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Punch, you're on.
Okay. Uh, how does the Mexican government feel and the president feel about the U.S. immigration problem? And specifically, what have they done on the north or the south border lately and on the north border, taking care of the immigrants that we're stopping?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's a very controversial issue here in Mexico, and I'll tell you why. In the spirit, this is very important. You know that AMLO, and therefore AMLO's administration, has a not necessarily outspoken policy, but one that's done out by acts in terms of keeping peace with the U.S. All right. So how do they do that? Okay, very specific. I'll give you a couple of examples. When there was some pressure from the United States regarding this immigration coming in and these caravans coming in from Honduras, Salvador, of course, Nicaragua, Guatemala, coming through the Guatemalan-Mexican border, AMLO was just organizing or trying to, and that was one of the issues that we have with the National Guard. He was organizing the National Guard, and the first organized National Guard was sent to the border. So the de facto wall, sadly, is some people, you know, there's figures that vary between 15,000, 19,000 troops, National Guard troops at the Mexican-Guatemalan border holding back immigrants. Okay? All right. And it's funny because, you know, this is something we Mexicans don't like to admit, but this is going to be a joke in poor taste in my case. So, you know, when Trump says Mexicans are going to pay the wall, and we all laugh here in Mexico, we're not going to pay any wall. We're already paying the wall. It just happens to be a human wall in the southern border, okay, with our National Guard that's supposed to be policing, you know, and doing away with the drug cartels. Now, in the north, Mexico has been pushing back on U.S. immigration policies regarding the safe country status or the safe state status. And what that means, if I'm correct, is it's funny because there's so many issues going on right now in Mexico and in the States too that I try to keep up with the news, and sometimes I don't feel as competent to talk about this stuff because I feel so superficial. But I can tell you that Trump pushed really hard on Mexico being one of these safe states where you could hold, like a holding ground for immigrants. And so that de facto situation, what's actually happening is that we are holding immigrants in the northern border and that are being processed for basically for immigration into the U.S. So although we're not declared officially as I forget what it's called, safe state or safe whatever, we are carrying out the functions as a country to hold and help process, you know, these immigrants. Some of these immigrants, by the way, are creating shanty towns around the different border towns. And some of them, in fact, this is very interesting because I've been driving around Mexico. Some shanty towns of immigrants have emerged in different cities like León, Guanajuato, which León is about 1 hour away from San Miguel de Allende, west of San Miguel, northwest, or Aguascalientes, which is north, you know? So there's shanty towns of immigrants, and they're just kind of trying to see. Now, AMLO also had a policy which hasn't been very effective with the administration, which was to create programs where they create jobs for these people, you know, in other words, support the countries, and he did send some money to support these countries, Salvador and Honduras, so they could create jobs and kind of stop the immigration from Central America. So to respond to your question, we've been, you know, and I think AMLO in that regard, I don't like to say it this way, but I want to be objective. He's been very adept at really handling the relationship with the U.S. You know? I can give you another example, which is kind of quirky. AMLO had this crazy idea of giving refuge or asylum to Evo Morales. I don't know if you remember this, the dictator from Bolivia. But Evo Morales is not only a drug trafficker to begin with and a cocaine producer, and cocaine producer organizer, but he's also a very strong communist. He's part of this group of that belongs to Chavez and the guy in Argentina and so on. Anyway, so Evo Morales was here with asylum, and by the way, within a week, Pompeo flew into Mexico City, and the day after Pompeo was here, Evo Morales was on a plane, okay, out to Argentina. No explanations given, by the way. In the meantime, that first week before Pompeo arrived, AMLO was like, he's my friend and he's my buddy and solidarity and my comrade and all this stuff. Next thing you know, right after Pompeo is here, AMLO, Evo Morales is out of Mexico on a plane to Argentina. So I hope that answers your question, Butch.
Thank you.
Good. Ben, can we hold for a second? We've got actually 2 minutes to go till 1 o'clock. I'm wondering if you could stay on. Some people may have to leave, but if we could keep the Zoom open. Madison, do you think that's okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Thanks, Madison. I hope this has been enjoyable. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but also I welcome my daughters have some really tough questions sometimes. So if they're, or my son, so if they want to ask them, they're always asking me these tough questions. I don't always have an answer for them,
but I wanted to introduce
your
somebody.
presentation, and thank you for everybody's attendance. Per Gene's request, we can definitely keep it going for a little bit, but understand that some people have obligations they've got to get to.
And I wanted to introduce somebody who's very important to the club, Maureen Garnett. She's got the Wharton alumni logo up there. Maureen is the person who sends out the emails and takes care of the website. You want to throw? There she is.
Yeah, hi. Hi,
Maureen.
I hid myself. I didn't want to disrupt your meeting, but hi, Ben. I loved listening. I was waiting all week to chime in.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen.
Everyone makes my job working for your club so easy. It's just fun. You guys have the best event. And I did chuckle a lot in the beginning when they talked about that tequila party a couple of years ago. That was very well attended. I think HBS San Antonio, you guys always have so many fun events.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great seeing you, Maureen. It's great to hear your voice as well.
And also, thank you, Maureen,
Sure.
for everything that you do. And then Sophia from the Harvard Undergraduate Club joined us there. Sophia's a past president. And the late Philip Serwer is here now. Comment? I have a question for you, Ben. Is there any research going on in Mexico to find a vaccine?
Not that I'm aware of, to tell you the truth. I know they're ironically working with U.S. companies, also with the Chinese, and don't ask me why with the Chinese, but they're working with the Chinese. And but I'm not aware. I think what we lack, I'll be honest with you, our health system, and it's really been strained, and it also shows that somehow we haven't invested, we haven't invested behind it, and our research sadly also is quite curtailed. Then you never know. Sometimes we have some incredible breakthroughs in this country, but great question. Thank you. Unfortunately, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
And no other questions. I know it's funny because I could have touched on a lot of things. Did I touch on foreign direct investment, by the way? Did I tell you that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So not everything is horrible. No.
I wanted to ask Roger Trevino something. Roger, did you once tell us that you got the idea for your company from down in Mexico with the twang? Wait, you're on mute, Roger.
Okay, I got it. I got it now, I think. Yeah, it was Mexico City is where I got the idea. Ben and I've talked about that a couple of years back, you know.
Yeah.
And with Garth also that I see there. But yeah, that happened almost 36 years ago. And we've got this company going here for that long. And in Mexico, we're probably right at 25 years
That's great.
operating. And Ben's been to that plant, I think.
Yes,
I think I think Garth has also.
Yeah. And Roger, I was going to ask you, and that you can share with the rest of the group, do you have any pushbacks or on what I had to say right now, or any ahas or ohs, that you say, you know what, that really didn't check, Ben, or, Ben, and that's okay. Please, I want to hear what you think, because I know you're very much in tune with what's going on in Mexico.
Well, I agree with what you were saying, your assessments and everything. Fortunately for us, we just do everything the way it's supposed to be done on both sides of the border. And in all that time, we've only had one incident and came out of Mexico City, and the regulation that was being interpreted a different way in San Luis than it should have been. But it took us about a year, but it straightened itself out. It's been smooth sailing.
Yeah.
We've got great people down there working.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah. No, that's great. No, any other, we didn't talk about the COVID, but I can share with you very quickly that we were late to address COVID in Mexico. They're like the US, there's people that believe in it, people that don't. Unfortunately, we do have cities here in Mexico that are highly densely populated, like Mexico City. So whether you believe it or not, it's definitely, there's a contagion, and there's a contagion, and there's definitely a virus spread. And one of the biggest problems with Mexico is today, the latest number that I saw, we're up to over 70,000 deaths reported. We're close to 700,000 people that have been infected or contagiados, we say, with contagion. Now, the problem we have is that we're severely undercut in terms of testing. And that's one of the big issues, too, is that, I think whereas the average is around 100 tests per 1,000 in the population, or whatever it is, we have less than 10, So it's radical. As you can imagine, it's the big cities with a high density population that are highly stressed. Areas like San Miguel de Allende, or for example, where your plant is, where are scarcely populated, don't really have this problem unless they're having people coming in and out. And of course, the dilemma is like everywhere in the world, how much do you lock down and impact the economy, and vice versa. And there's that whole entire sort of philosophical and policy decision that has to do with, what comes first, do you need a healthy population to have a solid economy, or do you need a solid economy to have a healthy population? I think we all grew up thinking we need to have an educated and a healthy population, to have a solid and growing economy. But at any rate, and it's interesting. The other thing I can share with you about AMLO, he's been attacking the whole GDP thing, and he's more against certain indicators of economic growth, and he's more about economic, what he calls social development, and kind of finding different ways to measure that, and but at the end of the day, I think my biggest concern, if you were to ask me, and nobody asked me this, but one of my biggest concern, my personal biggest concern with AMLO, and I'm thinking I'm going to give a commercial here, by the way, from the perspective of my book, Lead with Character, is that he doesn't listen to other people. And he surrounds himself with people that are sycophants. So that to me would be the biggest concern, because how can you grow as a person? How can you grow as a leader? And how can you truly, although I do believe he cares about the people, how can you truly care about, putting everybody else's interests first if you're not willing to listen to others, and surround yourself with better people than you, and in every aspect. And by the way, quick, Roger, you're on my book. I want to let you know that.
Okay.
Okay.
Roger's in the book.
Yeah, you're in my book, Roger. So at any rate, but I don't know, any pushbacks that you may have. I think Arturo had a good pushback, and I thought it was interesting, in terms of the calls that he's getting from his friends. And so it's fair to have a pushback.
Did we freeze? Okay. Could you give us, just shout out your email if people want to email you?
Sure. Look, my email, by the way, I'm going to sound like a commercial. My email is Benjamin Beckhart, altogether, at gmail.com. And Beckhart is Beckkhart. Oh, it actually appears on my screen. That's pretty good. Yeah. You can also find me, by the way, in my webpage, www.benjaminbeckhart.com. Or you can find me on all these social platforms such as LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
No, you're most
really
welcome.
Interesting.
Thanks, everyone. It's been wonderful seeing your smiling faces, and please stay safe, keep healthy, and make a difference to everyone, please.